Maximize your yields while spreading out your workload with the earliest maturing winter cereal. Visit kws.com/CA to see how our hybrid rye varieties can work for you. High yields, high quality, high value for your farm. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to this Wednesday, July 17th edition of RealAg Radio. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and it is going to be a fantastic show if I do say so myself. So a few things. Yes, it is Wednesday. We typically dig into some market info, and we will. We're going to talk specifically about the hog markets with Christine McCraken of Rabobank in our first segment. But we're going to do things a little bit differently today because this week is a special one. It is Ag in Motion out in Saskatoon. Your regular host, Shaun Haney, is going to be traveling to Helena, Montana to record Friday's show. And so that's a very special one, which means no issues panel on Friday. Oh, but don't you worry. We are going to do the issues panel today. So for the rest of the show, after my discussion with Christine, we're going to have Tyler McCann. He's the managing editor of CAPI. He's going to join us. And then we'll have Kelvin Heppner and Shaun Haney of Real Agriculture on for an issues panel. Now, we've got a ton of stuff to get through. I'm not sure how much we can actually cover in 3 segments, but we're going to try. For sure, we're going to talk about the FPT meeting going on, the Federal Provincial Territorial Ministers meeting happening in Whitehorse this week. I happen to know a few people who are attending either the meetings around that meeting, etc. And I have to say, thank you to you all for sending the beautiful scenery that is Whitehorse. It is absolutely stunning out there. We will likely talk about the impact that former President Trump has announced his running mate for the presidential election. That is likely to have an impact on trade. Let's be honest. J.D. Vance is a protectionist, so we're going to talk about that. Likely going to talk about MMP's foray into agronomy. That's a big story this week. Likely talk about the risk report that CAPI's got out. I want to ask Tyler about that one. And, well, if you were listening last week, you would have heard an update on the feed regulations here in Canada that took 14 years to push through. And I want to know, is 14 years an acceptable amount of time to modernize legislation? I'm going to guess no. All right. If you've got feedback on today's show, anything you hear, or past shows, of course, you can call that feedback line, 1-855-776-6147. You can, of course, drop me a note, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or find us across social media at Real Agriculture. We're on TikTok, X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. We're there. Alrighty, let's take a quick break, and I'll be back with Christine McCraken of Rabobank right after this.
Talking right now to Exotic's Global Business Development Manager, Tom Trigano. Let's talk about what exactly does Envita do.
So what Envita can do, it can be applied with your herbicide, your fungicides. It gets inside the plant cells, and that's where it fixes nitrogen. So really, we're talking about an alternative form of nitrogen that can fix nitrogen into a usable form right inside the plant cells. You can either use it in furrow, or it can be a foliar applied product.
What can farmers expect from Envita when they're using it?
Obviously, that depends on the crop you're growing and what your fertility rates are. The vast majority of the folks using it are comparing it at 100% of their fertility. So they're not changing their nitrogen down. Growers are going to use this. That's going to provide them the best ROI. The vast majority of the time, we're looking at this as standard fertility rates. Sometimes you're going to lose some nitrogen. I expect Envita to show a stronger benefit than it typically does, simply because the applied nitrogen would have been lost.
If somebody wants more information on Envita, the website exotic.com, or of course, you can always talk to your local retailer to source the product.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and joining me now to talk about hogs, pork, all things pig, it's Christine McCraken. She's Executive Director for Animal Protein with Rabobank. Hello, Christine. Welcome here.
Hey, great to be with you.
All right. We can talk about other proteins too, but let's focus mostly on the hog markets. So what right now, we're in the middle of July. What's happening right now in the hog markets?
Well, it's been a pretty disappointing summer. The reality is that in a lot of parts of, especially through the Midwest, it was a little cooler. We had a little more mild weather, a little different than we have now, maybe. But the hogs grew really well. So they put on a lot of weight. We pulled some hogs forward, and that put a lot of pressure on the markets. I think that comes at the same time that we're seeing a little softer demand. I think primarily at food service, it seems like, for some of that breakfast food, it doesn't line up very well, maybe with what we're seeing in terms of record travel numbers. We thought it'd be a little better. But it is interesting that I think some of the food service companies might be cutting back a little on how many slices of bacon they offer you on that breakfast sandwich, or a little smaller portions. I think that is filtering in a little bit into the demand picture. But overall, a little disappointing as we come through the summer here.
Mm-hmm. Now, on a global scale, have we seen any big shifts on that demand side as well?
It's been a little soft from an export perspective into Japan, just because the yen has been so soft or so weak relative to the Canadian dollar, US dollar. It's been a really tough go for them. Otherwise, not a lot of big moves. I think, in general, we're seeing pretty good export demand only from the perspective that European hog production's down so much. So there's a lot of kind of room for U.S. and Canadian pork exports into the global market. So it's been a pretty good export picture across the board, in large part because of that drop in European availability, but not any other big moves like we've seen here in North America.
Mm-hmm. Do we know why the European hog production is down so much?
Yeah, there's a few factors that really played into that. Namely, they'd gone through that same period of real economic weakness coming out of COVID and some really high feed costs, similar to what we saw here. But then, at the same time, they got African swine fever in Germany that really limited their ability to trade, to export pork. That was a factor. And then at the same time, they've had some regulation that has limited their ability, not just to expand, but is actually forcing producers to exit. And that really has contributed to that kind of, multi-pronged decline in pork production.
I don't know about you, but I've traveled to Germany. They eat a lot of pork. So it is a little surprising to think that a country that eats that much pork would be scaling back. But African swine fever being one of those factors that thankfully in North America we're not dealing with, but I would imagine that makes for some very anxious times in the hog industry in Germany.
Yeah, it's interesting though. They haven't lost that. They've been able to keep the African swine fever largely out of the commercial herd, so it hasn't had as much of an impact on production. What is surprising though is to see that the pretty sharp declines in pork consumption within Germany. If you look at the demographic trends, a lot of the younger generation just not eating as much pork as they did historically. So, it's such an important part of their culture and part of their diet, but at the same time, we're seeing kind of this reversal of trend. So it's something we're watching. Obviously, things can turn around, but for now, not very hopeful here in the short run for Germany.
For Germany, that's right. Okay, now here at home, so here in Canada, we got word last week that, I don't know, maybe as an insider you would have seen this coming, but we certainly didn't hear at Real Agriculture, but Maple Leaf Foods announcing that they are spinning off their pork production side into its own entity. Your thoughts on that, why this might be a good time to do that, where a company might see an advantage to doing that right now?
Yeah, I unfortunately, I was not in the room when they made the decision, but and I hate to comment on what their real motivation might be specifically. What I can say about the industry broadly is that it's a really tough business it tends to be somewhat cyclical, and for a public company that likes to have some stability in margins and maybe not all of the commodity fluctuations. That might be part of the motivation behind spinning it out. And two, it takes a lot of focus, right? Management focus, a lot of time. It's a little different maybe than some of the consumer goods, companies out there, like the bulk of the remainder of their business, right?
Yeah.
And they still have that really strong relationship as it's set up, at least in the filing. So, as we think about it, maybe big picture, timing wise, I don't know as though there's any real. There's never a really good time, maybe to do this. There certainly isn't anything, structural about the changes happening in the industry today. But it might be about the focus that business needs, and then also maybe thinking about how it may impact the overall share price relative to that. That's just my high level thoughts there.
And we haven't been able to talk to them yet, and I don't know that they would tell us anyway. But internally we sort of talked about the fact that certainly by creating a second or a standalone company, I mean, it could potentially mean that that company could now sell to what would have been considered competition on the hog side, which maybe would help even out some of those ebbs and flows. That's, some speculation, but realistically, to your point about the hog industry being a tough one, amen to that. It is, I don't know, hog farmers, you have my full respect because it's a roller coaster.
It's been a really tough go, and certainly it's going to be hard for them too. I think though with the focus they'll be able to put on that business and hopefully maybe attract some strong shareholders that are really interested in growing that business and developing it as a standalone. Certainly the company is still involved in the family, but there may be some other motivations strategically down the road.
Mm-hmm. All right. So in wrapping up here, what will you be watching in the next couple weeks? Feed prices are down, sure, but what do you keep on the radar for the next couple weeks in the hog market?
Wow, there's so much. Right now, it's really all about the crop, right? And to see kind of how that turns out, especially with some of these hot weather weeks ahead of us here in pollination. But when we think about kind of weights and where those are headed, we'd expect to see weights maybe coming down a little. That could tighten the supplies up here over the next few weeks. And that will help hog prices stabilize a bit and maybe move a bit higher. So there's some things to watch from the demand side. I'd say, hopefully we'll get a little bit of stabilization in the cutout and things start to move the other direction here as we head into the fall. But, I think that's a lot of shoulds on my radar. I don't know as though I have a lot of confidence in any of that outlook. But there are, pig prices. There are also politically, there's a lot of discussion with the elections coming up, what that might mean to trade, and maybe some of the elections around the world potentially impacting North America. The U.S. MCA is up for renewal in 2025, and with a new president in Mexico and a new president potentially here in the U.S., that could shake things up a little too. So I think it's all about not just the near-term fundamentals and how this weather might affect things, but really thinking through how we should be thinking about growth for 2025 as these pigs come on the market.
All right. Christine, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. All right, we're going to jump now to our issues panel. Tyler McCann of CAPI, Kelvin Heppner, and Shaun Haney right after this.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety, enhanced weed control, and a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern. Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and it is time for a Wednesday Issues Panel. A real treat this week. Joining me for today's panel, I've got Tyler McCann. He's the Managing Director of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, Kelvin Heppner of Real Agriculture, and our intrepid traveler, Shaun Haney, joining us from some airport somewhere. Welcome here, gentlemen. Let's start with Kelvin. I'll start with you. This week, well, it's a busy one. The FPT meeting happening in Whitehorse. So far, kind of quiet. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's due to the political environment right now, but like you said, there are some mainstay items on the agenda that we've heard the ministers from across Canada, the provincial, federal, territorial ministers getting together in Whitehorse. They've talked about the grocery code of conduct, African swine fever preparedness, things like that. I know there is a pesticide review study that was completed this spring that they are going over as well. So yeah, in many ways, it does seem like there isn't a headline hot button issue that they're hoping to resolve or that they have aspirations of resolving. I know that yesterday there are several senators attending the meeting as well. And the Senate, of course, the Ag Committee has recently completed that report on soil conservation across Canada. And they presented on that and talked about that. And it seems like there is maybe some discussion about the role of the Senate changing, and the Senate potentially in one way being an avenue for driving ag policy changes. And as we've seen, Senator Rob Black, for example, and now Senator Mary Robinson, the former president of Canadian Federation of Agriculture, former RealAg Issues panelist, they are at the meeting, and there's talk about using the Senate as a vehicle to advance ideas. It'll be interesting because I think one of the big overhanging issues of this whole FPT meeting is the prospect of a change in federal government and what that means for ag policy. And are we kind of in limbo mode already at this point? And so it'll be interesting if we do see a change in federal government, also what the role of the Senate is, as of course right now the vast majority of the senators are appointed by our current prime minister, by Justin Trudeau. So yeah, I think those are some of the discussion points at the meeting. But yeah, like you said, Lyndsey, not a lot of big hot topics.
Would we call it a lame duck FPT then?
It might almost be that.
It maybe, although it's in Whitehorse, so I think it's like a lame moose. I don't know.
Well,
something
the
like
biggest challenge is probably trying to fend off the horseflies.
Yes, and mosquitoes, the size of
scenery, though. Beautiful scenery. There might be some bugs, but the scenery, I'm sure, is amazing.
It's stunning.
I also hope you brought your sleep mask with 19 hours of daylight.
I did have people sending me 11:30 p.m. shots outside of what the light is like. It is stunningly beautiful, I have to say, and the sort of side tours that people went on over the weekend before this meeting, I am a little jealous. The water in the river, like the color, it's stunningly beautiful. Okay, Tyler, though, let's stick with this for just a moment. That idea of a changing role for the Senate in policy, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think you've got to be careful what you wish for. And so I think we've got two examples today where people want different things out of the Senate. A lot of agriculture have been hopeful that the Senate would have just passed the bills or the House's bill exempting agriculture from the carbon tax fully. The Senate didn't. People were up in arms on that. On the flip side, I think a lot of people are looking for the Senate to try and be a bit more obstructionist on 282, which is going to change the mandate of the Foreign Affairs Department and make it more difficult for Canada to negotiate trade deals. So, I think we like to be able to pick and choose what we want the Senate to do. On all of this and on this idea that we're in kind of a lame duck FPT meeting already, we're more than a year away from an election likely, and it is too early for people to kind of be taking the foot off the gas. There's a lot of issues in the sector, and these ministers should be working hard.
Yeah, I don't know how comfortable I am with people that are appointed to the Senate being the trigger for policy direction. That just seems a little bit backwards to me, unless we're going to being a true Albertan, maybe we need to have, I would feel better about that if we had an elected Senate, but an appointed Senate, I don't know if that sits very well with me.
Yeah, but Shaun, we can talk for a long time about the theory, about how things should be, what the world should do. But the reality is we've got senators, we've got a majority of senators that are effectively Liberal appointees. They claim to be independent, but their voting record is pretty aligned with the current government's. And that's just going to be a dynamic that the sector is going to have to struggle with and will be a challenge for how we think about getting legislation through in the future.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to agree with Shaun on this one, though. If we're going to talk about, the power that the Senate already has or the role we may want the Senate to play, I really do feel like it kind of has to be one or the other. We can't have more power or more decision or more policy shift to the Senate if they're not elected. Yeah. So I can see where that discussion comes up. Go ahead, Shaun.
And Lyndsey, I think I really hope what's being discussed is maybe some sensitivity testing in terms of our current BRM programs related to the massive drop we've had in crop prices and continue to look like they're going to head lower, as you talk to lots of different market analysts this week at Ag in Motion. So I hope that's been a part of the discussion as well, because they're going to be tested because farm income is definitely going to be lower than it has been the past number of years.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Kelvin.
I was just going to jump in. Tyler, do you have anything on your list of things that you're hoping they're addressing in Whitehorse this week?
Well,
on the spot?
Yeah. So again, I think in an ideal world, they would be talking about things like our BRM programs positioned to respond. But we've got this world where in between kind of the serious negotiations of the FPT framework, the 5-year deals, ministers don't do as much as they should be doing. And so, yeah, I mean, I've got a long list of things, Kelvin, I'd like them to talk about. But once again, I think you get a bit of a difference where, what they're going to do is go through the motions on things like African swine fever, which is real, serious, important issue. But on a lot of other things, we're not going to see much progress.
Yeah, feels like it does kind of feel lack of urgent topics, the destination, it just kind of feels like a little bit of a getaway.
Well, Shaun, are you critiquing them going up to Whitehorse?
Well, no, the territories, I was a part of a number of meetings across Canada and the territories participated. I think it's important that probably some people are exposed to agriculture in the territories. Because it's not Saskatchewan by no stretch of the imagination, but there is agriculture in those areas, but it's incredibly difficult for people to get in and out of at this time of the year.
And we probably should be paying more attention to those kind of broader food issues in the north, real food security issues, also real opportunities to lean into things like vertical agriculture. Again, if Canada had some sort of ambition to be a leader in anything, vertical agriculture could be it, and it could play a big role in helping feed people in really remote communities across the country.
Absolutely. All right.
It's also the first meeting for Ontario's new Minister of Agriculture, Rob Flack, and Manitoba Ag Minister, Ron Kostitian. I believe it'll be his first since the NDP returned to power, his first in many years attending as well. And there might be some other new faces, but that's also always part of this meeting too, is the new introductions that have to take place and getting up to speed on all the issues.
Absolutely. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention that there are some other meetings happening on the East Coast where the premiers are meeting, actually, and we could probably do a whole show on that. But seeing some of the discussion come out of that as well, interesting to see them so far apart. You'd think they'd coordinate. But anyway, one thing I wanted to talk about, and Tyler, you brought this up as well, and I think it's an important one and sort of feeds into this, is the pace at which change happens on the policy level. Last week, I spoke with Melissa Dumont, with ANAC, the Animal Nutrition Association of Canada, celebrating that we got some new feed regs passed here in Canada. And it only took you guys 14 years from a white paper and a admission by the government that this should be modernized, all the way through to being gazetted. So, Tyler, I'll start with you. Is that an acceptable amount of time for modernization?
No, absolutely not. And the cost and impact on Canadian businesses, on Canadian competitiveness, on growth in the sector is really quite significant. It would be one thing, Lyndsey, if the feed regs just happen to be the exception, but really what it is the rule today. And the rule today is we have a hard time moving regulatory reform forward, and government doesn't see the same pressure to make progress that it should.
And the amount of people that are totally comfortable with it, as if it's some sort of extensive due diligence on Canada's part to keep all Canadians safe from who knows what, that's the part that is the most unsettling. It's not just government in being slow, it's the people that accept it.
Well, and to that point, in the interview last week with Melissa, talking about, other things took precedence. And Kelvin, one of those things were the animal transport regs. So it wasn't that, some legislation didn't, or no legislation passed. It was very much that, there was a political bent to what does get passed. So do we need a better roadmap forward for modernization of some of these regulations so that we're not waiting a decade or more for change?
Yeah, you look at the review of the Canada Grain Act, that would be another one. I think you could argue it's been around even longer, lingering even longer than the feed regulations. And seed modernization would be another example. There are plenty of examples where an issue hasn't had the political win. There have been many attempts and many rounds of consultations, but those just continue, and we don't seem to ever get it closer or across the finish line. And yeah, I'm not sure what type of reform needs to happen, but it's got to be easier. Like Tyler says, it's hurting Canada and holding us back in so many ways to have to get it through these political processes that obviously are very difficult. There's a huge bottleneck. It's difficult to get it through.
Yeah,
Shaun,
we got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Like, goodness gracious. And don't get Tyler and I started on seed regulatory modernization.
Well, I was just going to say, Shaun, obviously your history has been closely tied to the seed industry, just recently at some meetings as well. Can we generalize what the feeling is on the seed modernization pace right now?
Oh, it feels like we've been doing it for forever. Like, you could have walked out of that room 4 years ago and walked in last week, and not much has changed. It's the same. It's the same discussion. It's the same fragmented battle. Everybody not on the same page, and it has been similar to the Grain Act review. A laborious, slow process, and really getting down to a fight over things like control, fights over how interested you are in actual change, instead of some of the key issues. It's been just painful.
And I think it's a really good example of a lack of ambition, right? So the government goes through this multi-year process, and at the end of the day, the best they can come up with is what amounts to like minor tweaks to the system, and that's not what we need. That's not what we need in this country. There are stories out again this year that 10,000 new public servants were added over the last year. This is not for a lack of people in this country to do this work. It's a lack of political will and a desire to actually push things forward, and that's what we need.
All right,
Canada, the land of aspiration, the land of no action.
The land of
Said
public
it before,
service.
I'll say it again.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with the Wednesday Issues Panel right after this.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and joining me for today's Issues panel is Shaun Haney, Kelvin Heppner, and Tyler McCann. Shaun, I'll go to you. You are, of course, joining us from, I don't know, some airport somewhere, but yesterday was a big day and an even bigger evening out in Saskatoon. Tell us all about the STARS event.
Well, I am joining you here for this panel in the Minneapolis airport. So there is that, showing that we do broadcast from anywhere, as everyone's staring at me in the morning lounge. Mm-hmm. Yesterday morning, I hosted moderated a panel, I should say, with Saskatchewan pulse growers. Lee McGrain was there, Canterra Seeds. We talked about the future of pulse breeding in Saskatchewan specifically, and how they're moving from a non-royalty to a VUA model where there will be a royalty, a reduced royalty, even on something like common seed. Or farm safe seed. So that was really interesting. A lot of great questions from the audience. A lot of farmers were there. It went over very well. I thought some good debate. Also, then at night, that's where it was spectacular. Okay, so there's 1,300 people at the Field of Stars event. They graciously asked me to MC. It's something to be standing up there on the podium in front of 1,300 people trying to entertain them. Amazingly, Lyndsey. In just over 2 hours, they raised $460,000, and that's not even the final tally, because the online auction continues through the next couple days here. So just absolutely amazing, the support. They sold off a Stars bike that was bought and then donated back and then bought again. I think that bike raised, just that Stars bike alone, which I rode all around the floor. It was awesome. Quick Dick McDick delivered it to me, and then I rode it all over the place. I think that bike raised like $38,000.
Amazing.
Huge.
So
Great
what
support.
What was like the energy in that room? Like, that just sounds so exciting.
Alive. Like,
yeah.
Just, you're huge ag component. The presenting sponsor was Nutrien. Corteva was the $80,000 matching sponsor. So they raised, I think they raised like $90,000 in 10 minutes via like a bit of a telethon. And Corteva matched that with $80,000.
Wow.
Plus had bought like 25 tables at the event. So corporations like that stepping up big time. And agriculture in Saskatchewan knows that if Stars is a lifesaver. Minutes matter when you're living in such a remote place. And there are remote places in Saskatchewan. We joke about it, but it's the reality. And Stars, they had somebody there that gave his story about how Stars saved his life. His kids were on the stage with him. His kids were crying. It was heavy. And so great cause, great bunch of money raised. And just to operate Stars alone in Saskatchewan, it costs $22 million a year. So I think, events like that matter.
They do, absolutely. And Kelvin, of course, here has been part of the ice plunge for Stars in Manitoba. It's in Alberta as well. Here in Ontario, we have Orange. We have the Orange helicopter. It is an incredible part of our healthcare system, especially in those remote areas. And you're right, Shaun, the access to something like Stars is literally the difference between life and death for people who end up getting it. So really important and amazing to see everyone step up.
And big shout out to RealAg Radio listener Chad Sobolski, who came up to me last night. Farmer in Saskatchewan, says he listens to this show every single day, does not miss it. So big shout out to Chad.
All right. Hello, Chad. Okay, let's stick with, though, just quickly. It is Ag in Motion this week in Saskatchewan, the outdoor show. Of course, Ontario has its own in September. Tyler, what do you think the role or the evolving role of a show like an outdoor show or the field days is for sharing information, new products, new innovations with farmers?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time to kind of live in where farmers have access to more information than they probably have ever had access to. You go on the internet, you go into Google, ChatGPT, they'll figure it all out for you. But there really is nothing like being able to go and see something in person, look at it, talk to people, and I think that's not going to go away, and the role of these shows are going to become more important. It also, it's nice to get together with people, and we can't undervalue that kind of networking or that face-to-face contact and being together in a big field with a bunch of like-minded people.
Mm-hmm. Kelvin, is it really just about the food trucks, though?
Yeah, as long as the lines aren't too long. But
right.
Yeah, like Tyler said, or you're standing in line with good company and catching up with good people like that. I would echo what Tyler said. There's aspects of in-person farm show, and I'm actually I'm in my truck right now at a field tour here in southern Manitoba, and they have a food truck here, which I think is what you're alluding to, Lyndsey. It's a Mexican Mexican street taco food truck. So I'm looking forward to grabbing some lunch when we're done here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have to stick to a very tight schedule here so that Shaun can catch a plane and Kelvin can get a taco. These are very important things. Okay, we've got a lot to cover on today's issues panel. So why don't we take a quick break and we're going to get into, we've got the Trump's running mate to discuss. We've got some big changes in agronomy set up in the West, and we've got a new report to talk about. So let's take a quick break and I'll be back with the issues panel right after this.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today. Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Wednesday, and it is the Wednesday Issues Panel. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. I've got Tyler McCann, Kelvin Heppner, and Shaun Haney joining me as well. Let's dive into it. Certainly big news this week, broke on Monday, that MNP was joining forces with six agronomy companies across Western Canada. Shaun, we've had a lot of feedback on this one, a lot of questions, a lot of conversations. What are you hearing out and about this week at the farm show about what people think about this move by MNP?
Yeah, I also found out there's a lot of different elite eggs.
Yeah, we did find that out. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, carrying on.
Yeah, a lot of questions. I was at Ag in Motion on Tuesday and yesterday, and a lot of people asking me, competitors asking me, hey, what's going on here? And, my read here is that this is a pretty unique diversification for MNP. It's an accounting firm. They do farm business advising. Getting into agronomy, for some, could feel like a little bit of a stretch. But I think, if you listen to the interview that we did on Monday with Marvin Slingerland from MNP, he talks about how when MNP looks at neighboring farms, farms that share a fence row, there can be up to $100 net profit difference between those two farms. Some of the drivers of that, or one of the key drivers of that, is agronomy. So it is a nice fit. Now, for the companies that have the six that have been acquired, I think it also presents a unique opportunity. Many of them are tied to the old Agri-Trend model. So this is kind of bringing the gang back together, the bands back together, so to speak. And if you're running an agronomy company, what do you not like to do? You don't like IT, you don't like human resources, you don't like administration, and you definitely don't like sales. You like being in the field, you like scouting, providing agronomic advice. This removes all of that for you, right? And think about the feeder system of acres and sales to your agronomic business from that MNP accounting and farm business advising side of the business. So I think it makes a lot of sense the more you look at the puzzle pieces. Okay. So Kelvin, as a farmer, let's put on the farmer hat because, of course, you're at a field day. Does it make sense? Do you think, I'm going to go to my farm business advisor or accountant to link me up with agronomy? Does it make sense sort of in that way?
Yeah, I think I had the same initial reaction that Shaun mentioned, and I think a lot of people have had in terms of, wow, this is quite the outside the box move by MNP in terms of what I think of them. I think of them as being experts on the financial and business advisory side of things. And agronomy is certainly another realm of expertise. But the more you look at it, like Shaun said, behind the scenes, there is a lot of pieces that fit in this puzzle. And you think about MNP's ability to create software and databases and develop the behind the scenes platform that these agronomy businesses will no doubt tap into. I think there's a lot of exciting potential there too for these companies for the data side of things, especially if we're going to be moving into an environment with more traceability and more accounting and sustainability metrics and all those types of things being tracked at the farm level. I think that's where MNP's expertise overlaps a lot with this. And from a farmer's perspective, I'd sure hope that the independence remains from some of these companies that they are known for. All of these companies until now have been called independent agronomy companies or crop consulting businesses. And so that independence is something that you're certainly going to be paying attention to if you're a potential customer or an existing customer. But I think that, there are a lot of ways that this makes sense from the farm customer perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. And so, Tyler, this does segue into our next topic, and that is a report that just came out from CAPI, that Angus Reid did for CAPI, that talks about risk, that talks about the risk that farmers are concerned about, and policy and regulatory environment ranked very highly. And it does play in, as Kelvin alluded to, of this tie-in with, whether it's meeting certain regulatory needs or the potentially having the data to prove certain things and integrating potentially with accounting. Like I do start to see those connections. But Tyler, let's talk a bit about this report, what's in it, and what are the highlights?
Yeah, so I think first, Lyndsey, it's important to think about it in the context of, farmers across the country work with companies like MNP to understand the risks, develop the plans, strategies to deal with them. We as an ag sector, as an ag value chain, don't do a very good job of looking across the horizon and saying, okay, what are the things that agriculture as a sector as a whole should be worried about? And so what CAPI did with support from the Global Institute for Food Security, we went to Angus Reid and said, let's go out and survey people from across agriculture and food, farmers, processors, government, academia, other business people, input suppliers, and say, what are you worried about? To be honest, was a little bit surprised, but pretty convenient for me that actually policy and regulatory environment is the number one risk that people were concerned about. The other top two, there was really three that stood out: policy and regulatory environment, extreme weather, trade barriers, and protectionism. And it's unfortunate because, I think we're in the space in agriculture where by and large, people see these as already a problem. We were asked, is this something you're worried about now in the medium term? Already a problem, short term, medium term, long term. People are saying these are already a problem. And people are saying it's a chronic problem. But people are saying, really, we don't have any confidence that people are going to fix it. And it's one thing to say that we don't have any confidence we can fix extreme weather. That's maybe not a huge surprise. But it is a surprise to me that I think what we heard in the survey is that people are resigned to having a negative policy and regulatory environment. And I just don't think that that's acceptable. Agriculture has too much potential that's being left on the table to accept a regulatory and policy and regulatory environment that holds the sector back.
So this all, and Shaun, this all sort of plays together when I look at those. So policy and regulatory environment, extreme weather, and the trade barriers and protectionism. Realistically, when we look at those as a whole, we that really does sort of encompass what our business risk management programs, our BRM programs, should be trying to account for. We, in the Real Agri Studies data, I'm maybe perhaps somewhat interested to hear your thoughts, because we've kind of gone back to this point about the value of trade to some of our farmers, and we were surprised by it not ranking as high as we thought it should. Walk us through that.
Yeah, if numbers off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, farmers across the country, it was like a 0.5 on the scale, 2 being the most positive, -2 being the most negative. That investment in plant breeding was like a 0.74. Okay, so people see more positive impact from the investment in plant breeding than they did on trade. Environmental policy was definitely the most negative impact on people's farms. But I personally, as I look at those numbers in terms of how farmers value trade, I thought the numbers were low. And before you say, oh, well, Shaun, it's about supply management, it's the supply managed farmers that don't like trade that drag that number down. It wasn't the case. And the biggest mystery of all in all of this is why the largest farms over 5 million revenue, felt that trade had the least positive impact on their farm. No one can explain it to me, and I'm still waiting.
Mm-hmm.
And Lyndsey, just on the trade piece, we asked people what the priorities for government and the private sector should be. The number one priority for government was trade policy and advocacy. That's what people. So I think that there's a bit of a disconnect. Again, I think that's a bit of a, when you look beyond the farm gate and when you talk to processors and others, maybe you get more of that perspective, more of an understanding around why trade's important, because it came across.
But it is,
and trade can be a pain in the butt. Like trade's not easy, right? Like we have skirmishes. We're gonna have disputes. That comes with any sort of any agreement. The reality is, though, if Canadian agriculture does not have trade, we have got major problems. We're going to have way less livestock. We're going to have way less of certain crop types. It's a reality. We have to have it to create the economic value that we're trying to strive for in this industry.
Well, and this is one of the things that we've tried to do is to say, okay, the first step in kind of go back to the MNP example, right? The first thing they're going to do is work with you to figure out what your risks are. Now that we know what the risks are, we need to figure out what do we do about it, right? And how do we take a better approach and a more thoughtful approach to these things to actually mitigate these risks and turn the challenges into opportunities? And that's what the next phase of our work is going to be on this, because it isn't just enough to say trade's an issue, but so what do we actually do about it, and how do we actually put ourselves in a better position at the end of the day?
And if you look at all those risk variables, what is government's role in helping you deal with them? But at the same time, you need to be asking yourself, what am I personally responsible for? What do I need to do in my own farming business to mitigate some of these risks, and not just look to the government to be the solution for everything? Because that's the wrong place to look.
Mm-hmm. Kelvin?
I also see these results as reassuring and really encouraging for the work that we're doing in terms of this radio show and the audience engaging with us on discussions about policy and the risks. This shows that is the number one concern, policy risk, and that's something that we, of course, are trying to work through when we have these conversations on the Issues Panel, on the Ag Policy Connection podcast, and other on RealAgriculture.com and other places like that. So to me, this shows that this is important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And realistically, it is, I think, one of those things, trade especially, and all the stuff that goes around it, it can be overwhelming. I think, Tyler, the research or the survey does suggest that, it's viewed as what government should be taking a lead on trade, but it doesn't mean that, that government lead doesn't have an impact on things. And, perhaps as an individual farmer, you don't feel you can do a lot about trade, but you can certainly make sure that your representation knows how important it is to you and to keep pushing on that. Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, it came through very clear that people feel that even though policy and regulatory environment, again, this is the domestic policy and regulatory environment, is a major risk, they have no confidence that people are going to solve it. And that just shouldn't be, right? People need to be talking to government. People need to be coming forward with, again, clearly articulated problem, but also solutions to it to help fix this. I don't think that we should see this as an acceptable situation where we think that the policy environment's our biggest risk, and we're just resigned to it. I guess the good news is people are optimistic. I think that the kind of the sociology of a farmer, I guess, you see all of these risks and these challenges on the horizon, but you're still optimistic at the end of the day, is at play there. But we really should be demanding better outcomes from everybody involved. And again, go back to FPT ministers. There's a lots that they could be doing to help people understand what they're doing to make that policy risk easier to manage.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'd argue that, we're talking about domestic policy, like you mentioned, but I would say as an export-reliant nation, it's the policies in some of the markets we're trying to move product to, that's even a bigger risk because it's way less out of our control and it's harder to move the needle. So that's even a bigger risk in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think it may have less of an impact, Shaun. And I think that's where I think sometimes, again, a Canadian thing to do, we let our own government, our own people off the hook. We asked, how do you think Canada compares to other countries from a social perspective, environmentally, economically? The survey respondents said that we're ahead socially, we're ahead environmentally, but we're behind economically. And that's really true for farmers and other people in the industry. And again, I think that we don't talk about that enough, I think we think that we're doing well, but we're not. And we need to do a better job of it.
All right. One other, just as we round out the show here, one other piece of news, of course, that we got this week is that Trump announced his running mate for the presidential bid. Kelvin, I'll go to you first. We've got J.D. Vance. He's young. Is he protectionist? Do we need to worry?
Well, his track record probably shows him leaning that way, yes. And I think this fits in nicely with what Shaun was just talking about in terms of risk and in terms of our most important trading partner here. As yes, J.D. Vance is known as a populist, has been in favor of tariffs and import restrictions and that type of thing. And I think as opposed to maybe a Mike Pence last time around, who had that Midwest background and understood the importance of trade, I'm not sure that J.D. Vance has that understanding and that maybe that more of a Reagan era understanding of how the economy works. That being said, he does apparently have good ties to Canada, knows Canada well. He's apparently really good friends with Conservative MP Jamil Javani, who will likely be a cabinet minister if we have a Poilievre government. And so that could be positive there too. And of course, Ohio, where he's from, has lots of close trading relationships with the Canadian market as well. So I guess another thing, and Shaun can maybe speak to this too, we've seen Vance's position on things evolve over the last number of years too. And so it's tough to say what he's going to prioritize if he becomes the vice president.
Yeah, so he's from Ohio. He can see Canada from his house, similar to how Sarah Palin could see Russia.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's very interesting here is that his position has really morphed. It has really changed. He was a huge Trump critic going back a number of years ago. If he does become the vice president, he'd be the third youngest in the history of the United States. He has very much moved. When he started to run for the Senate, his positions on things drastically changed. He went from being anti-MAGA to being fully in the MAGA tent. He will be very supportive of some of the policies that many people outside the United States will have in terms of a second Trump presidency. Ukraine is one of them. And he's very much in favor of this tariff idea that President Trump or former President Trump has in terms of this 10% tariff on all goods, no exemptions coming into the United States. So Canada's got some work to do. He is very bright. He will be an exceptional foe going for. I really look forward to the Kamala Harris, J.D. Vance debate. I think that's way more interesting than the Biden-Trump debate because you've got two fairly well-educated, smart people that are going to be going toe-to-toe on the policies. And I'm going to be definitely tuning in if that does happen.
Mm-hmm. It'll definitely be more coherent. Anyway, all right, we've got to leave it there. Thank you to Shaun, Kelvin, and Tyler for joining me. Have a wonderful week, not weekend, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. All right. And I won't be back this week, but Shaun, you've got the show for the rest of the week. If you've got feedback on today's show, 1-855-776-6147. Drop us a line and, of course, follow us across social media. We'll talk to you next week. Cheers, everybody.